one of the questions that I thought was worth thinking about is, given the Common Core discussions, could we call them, controversies, that have risen up in the last, well, certainly last several months in Georgia and other places, but really been bubbling, I'd say, for the last couple of years, is sort of 4 questions that my sense is that if we had a competency-based learning mindset, it could solve some of these issues that I think we're going to confront as Common Core gets implemented over the next couple of years. So I thought I'd go through the questions, state sort of the problem that I see that they're pointing to, and then talk about how competency-based learning might break what seem to be pretty harsh trade-offs at the moment. So the first one is a lot of people are asking is, will the new assessments be truly different from the assessments we have today, right? You hear it all the time from educators that I don't want them just doing bubble and tests, I want them actually doing authentic performance objectives and things of that nature. And so will the new assessments be truly different? The second question is, will the assessments doom the Common Core because of how long they are? And we'll talk about that more in a moment, but depending on whether you're PARCC or Smart or Balanced, and obviously, which one is Georgia? I'm like PARCC. So you're looking at 6 to 10 hour assessments at the end of the year for these sorts of things. And there's this trade-off of length and validity and so forth. Now, the third piece of this is, will states be able to handle the associated costs with implementing those next generation learning assessments? And the last question is, will states then stick with the Common Core once we actually start getting results from how students are actually doing on them? And the sense across the country is that not in all states, but in many states, because these will be higher standards from what they've had, that the performance is going to sort of shock people and governors will run from it, or just simply lower the cut score, right? Just say, oh, 50% is actually proficient instead of 80% or whatever it might be. Yeah.
So do you want to give us a further prediction on 3 and 4?
I'll give you them all. Yeah.
Okay.
You probably know my prediction. So why don't I start with number 1? Go back to the top on that actually. So my sense is that that number 1 and number 2 are interdependent, right? That this debate over length versus truly authentic assessments. The challenge is that if you have one assessment at the end of the year that's a summative assessment, you're trying to test a very broad curriculum, and so in order to test it meaningfully, you need to make the test longer and longer and longer. And if you want to have really good performance objectives that actually require students to write essays or create things or whatever it might be, then that lengthens the test even more. And so that you sort of have this, in this current summative assessment world, you sort of have these two things bumping heads with each other. You can either have a really robust assessment that's truly different, but then it's going to be super long, in which case it's going to bother the heck out of people if their kids have to sit for 10 hours for an assessment, and schools basically shut down for a couple weeks while everyone's churning through assessment time again. Or you sacrifice length, in which case you cut out some of the more interesting assessment questions. Smart or Balanced actually was very transparent with this trade-off that they had, where they originally wanted to do a 12-hour assessment and have 2 or 3 very robust performance objectives in it. And then someone informed them that 12 hours would probably be a non-starter politically. And so they, shock, right? And so then they said, okay, well, we can do 6.5 to 8 hours instead. We'll just cut out 2 of the performance objectives. And so now all of a sudden you're in a dumber, sort of thinner, narrower test again. And my sense is that if we went from a competency-based learning mindset, you actually break this trade-off in this, because as students progress through standards, you can deliver bite-sized assessments that boil up into capstone projects as they do groups of assessments that make sense together, groups of standards that make sense together to prove mastery. And so you can actually have very deep projects on a set of assessments, and you avoid this sort of narrow, broad debate that keeps getting captured. And the length changes completely because assessments are actually built in with the instruction. As you're progressing, you have an assessment that's fine. You're not actually taking time out just because it's testing time for the entire school. And so maybe actually a group of students will continue to be learning while I'm over here doing an assessment or something like that. So my sense is competency-based learning can break the trade-off in 1 and 2. On 3 and 4, I think are interesting questions as well. 3, the big question I think on the costs, on the assessment side, I'm not even talking about the training of teachers for the moment, because I don't know that competency-based learning can help with that. But with the next generation assessments that are supposedly on demand and online, and will have huge broadband and infrastructure needs as a result, I think you're going to see several states walk away from Common Core just as those costs become apparent to them in the next couple of years.
Do they walk away from Common Core, or do they walk away from the assessment?
Unclear. I think that's an open question. My guess is that ACT and a couple others are going to come in with alternative schematics that will allow some of them to stay on Common Core. In some cases, I think what they'll do is they'll say, we'll do the paper-based versions of these assessments, which they're required to create, these consortia are required to create for special needs students. And so they'll just do that instead. And in some cases, I think 5 to 10 will just walk away completely. So I think you'll get a smattering. And again, my sense is, though, that if we had a competency-based system, you'd break this trade-off too, because you wouldn't have everyone sitting for the test at the exact same time. So you wouldn't need the same infrastructure and device needs all at once loading up on the system. That would just crash it to a halt. It would change those trade-offs as well. Even if we were in a digital learning environment, where I think would be great to get to, even in a digital learning, fully blended learning world, my sense is a lot of the work that students are going to be doing will still be offline work. And so the load on the network at any point in time will be significantly less if we went to this world. The last one I think is the trickiest, because I think you will see a lot of governors just lower the cut score or walk away. And so again, I anticipated the question. I don't know if they'll fully walk away. I think there's a chance. They might walk away from the assessments because of that, or they might just lower the cut score. It's hard to figure out what the game will be, I think, there, but there'll be another political pressure, I think, that makes it hard to stay with it. And my sense, though, is if you move to this competency-based system, where students, let's go to a hypothetical, right, which is, say I'm in 5th grade, and I read at a 2nd grade level. And we'll call grades in quotes, because competency-based learning, you might not have those. But, at the end of 5th grade, the teacher has managed to get me up to a 4th grade reading level, which is pretty impressive, 2 years of growth in a year. And then the 5th grade assessment comes down, and I do terribly on it, right, because I'm not reading at that level. So performance looks terrible in that system. Conversely, in a competency-based world, what you would see is you'd actually capture the growth of that individual student from 2nd grade to 4th grade. So you'd get 2 pictures. One, you'd get the accountability picture to know in much sharper detail this child is not at a 5th grade reading level, which would be very transparent. Because not only that, you'd say he's at a 4th grade reading level, which today the assessments can't help you figure that out because of the narrow, broad problem again. And then secondly, though, you'd say, but the good news is we made 2 years of growth, and you could be able to communicate that to individual parents and families, which I think would allay a lot of the political tension. Now, I think some of it will still exist, but having that transparency of standards, and this is what it means to be proficient or master of this sort of thing, and this is how you own it, and this is how you'll do more work to get yourself up there, I think it changes it from a punitive mindset to a growth mindset, which I think at least gives it a chance to avoid some of these political pressures. I'm not so naive to say as it'll completely sweep it away, but I think it gives us a chance. So those are my sort of answers to those 4 questions, and I worry that if we continue down the line, assuming the factory model assumptions with Common Core, that you almost doom it before it gets out of the gate, because I think those 4 questions will actually be pretty hard to solve.